All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. I'd like to call to order the Auburn School Committee meeting of March 20th, 2024. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Start down here on my right with introductions.
Dan Poisson, Ward 5.
Corin McGuigan, Ward 1.
Pam Hart, Ward 2.
Pam Albert, at large.
Connie Brown, Superintendent.
Pat Gaudier, Ward 3.
Connor Dufour, Student Representative.
Jillian Dumais, Student Representative.
Mark Conrad, Business Manager.
Sue Doris, Assistant Superintendent.
And Councilman Platts could not be here tonight. So moving on to our consent agenda, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, including the approval of tonight's agenda, the approval of the minutes of the March 6, 2024 meeting, and the approval of the minutes of the March 13, 2024 meeting? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Pam, second.
Second.
Pat. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay. Do I have anyone for public participation tonight? Does not look like it. All right, moving on to our presentation of the continued budget presentation of the 2024-25 Auburn School Department budget, adult education, and then on to our school committee deliberation. I will hand it off to Dr. Brown.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Jen Tyner, who is the director of the adult education program, to sit with Dr. Doris, and she will go through the slides for her budget presentation. Welcome, Jen. It's nice to see you.
So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with all of you tonight about adult education programming for Auburn schools. So the first slide really talks about what is adult education, and I always think it's important to spend a little bit of time talking about the different aspects of our programming. So when we talk about adult learning, really talking about lifelong learning, and we're here to serve adults in our community who may need some support with their academic preparation. So there may be people in our community who need to learn how to speak the English language. So we do programming that starts with really low-level literacy students who are looking to learn English language. That can turn into adult basic education programming, all the way up through adult secondary education. That includes an adult diploma pathway as well as HiSET. HiSET is the high school equivalency test. Some of you may be more familiar with the GED. Same assessment, just different name, but does the same thing. It's a 5-part nationally normed assessment that gives you your equivalency. So we do the HiSET programming. We also do college transitions programming.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
It jumped a little bit on me.
And so in addition to the academic side of what we do, we also do workforce development. So we're really looking at how do we expand workforce training opportunities that are short-term training opportunities that are tied to credentials of value. So the way we design those workforce programs is really to integrate all of the skills that are needed for the job. So that includes any academic skills that students might need refreshers. So for example, if we're doing a construction program, we're doing construction math, culinary program, culinary math, and that also includes employability skill training. So we use work readiness training, which is a curriculum that's approved through the state of Maine. And we try to tie all of those workforce trainings to a credential of value that means something to employers in our community so that they can go on to the job and start work. And then the third branch is really our community education programming. So that's our enrichment programming. That's what you see that comes out in the mail when you live locally. You'll see our brochure. We do a joint brochure, so it's between Lewiston and Auburn. If you flip on one side, you see Auburn. So you flip on the other side, you see Lewiston. And it's really great because we have a whole gamut of different options for people. You can come take an art class, or you can take an exercise class, stand-up comedy. There's a wide range of options for people. And we encourage people to reach out if you have a hobby or an interest and you would like to teach for adult education. That's a very tenable thing to do in the community. This slide really talks about or looks at the different enrollments that we've seen. And we have seen some kind of interesting trends in the Auburn community over the past year. So this screenshot is as of February 25th, which was when I actually did the slide. So enrollment is a variable. We have some additional numbers to talk about today, but you can see that we still have a really robust diploma and HiSET pathway program, currently at 71 enrolled students. One of the interesting trends that we've seen is that those learners tend to be coming to us with far fewer credits. So if a student is coming to adult education, in the past they may have come and they've just needed a handful of credits, maybe 2 or 3 classes. But now we're actually seeing more and more people coming to us who have virtually no credits, 1, 2 credits. So those folks are going to take longer to get through an adult diploma pathway, and that's obviously going to have an impact on graduation rate in terms of how many people are getting through as quickly. But we still have, quite a few students in there who are working their way through it. Some of those students, after a year or 2, may choose to transition to HiSET because they can get that credential done a little bit quicker than doing 20-credit diploma. For our multilingual and adult basic ed students, we were at 73. We're currently at 84 students, so we are constantly seeing an increase, especially in our multilingual population, our student body. And the top 3 kind of countries that are represented in that are Angola, Congo, and Ukraine. I just always find that to be a little bit interesting as we track who's coming into our community. We do have a situation, it's not unique in Auburn, it's also impacting Lewiston, so we have a bit of a wait list for the multilingual programming. We have about 42 students in our community that are waiting to get into classes. If you went over across the river and saw what was happening in Lewiston, we have over 1,000 multilingual learners at our Adult Learning Center, and we also have a wait list of 150 students. So there's growing need in our community, and that is something that if you track what the resettlement agencies are saying for the state of Maine, there are 3 of them. All 3 resettlement agencies have indicated that those numbers are going to double yet again in the coming year. So in Lewiston, our enrollments went up 500 students, not even all the way through this school year. And I would anticipate that with the growing enrollment of another 500, we're going to see a lot more students probably coming over to Auburn to seek services. So that's just something to keep in mind. So the structure of our program, you can see that we have some primary locations. So we have a classroom space that's located in central office. We have an office space that's at Edward Little High School, and in our evening courses, we're able to leverage sort of what we call the academic wing, which is really just to the left when you walk into the building. We're trying to keep all the students sort of in one place, so it's easier to track them. And then we are able to have some multilingual programming over at the High Street Congregational Church. They've been very generous to give us a couple of classrooms. So right now we're running 2 multilingual classes a couple days a week. And it's really convenient because they also have food pantries there and things of services for the multilingual students. We leverage classroom space over in Lewiston during the day for some of the workforce programming, including our CNA recertification. And one of the things I wanted to also mention is that when we look at our academic programming, we're continuing to try to leverage programming across the river. So as we're looking at what the needs are for courses on both sides for our academic students, so we don't have to run 2 biology classes in Lewiston and in Auburn. We can run 1 and then have students all attend in one place. The shared directorship, that is something that that's been since I've been here, so this is the 3rd year. I know it started before that, but the split is 65-35, so I'm in Auburn 15 hours a week, and I'm in Lewiston 25 hours a week. And that's a shared position. It's a contracted service here in Auburn. We have 3 full-time staff. Those staff we have a program coordinator / advisor who serves very much like an adult education guidance counselor, if you will. overseeing the bulk of our academic programming. She's just started with us in January, which she's doing a fantastic job. So we're very excited to have Carmen with us. We have one adult basic ed and English language teacher who works out of central office primarily, but also goes to the church to teach English language classes. And we have our program secretary, who also is primarily responsible for all the data and all of the community education programming that you see in our brochure. The Strengthening Maine Workforce Coordinator is a new position. It's 100% grant funded right now through the Strengthening Maine Workforce Grant, which comes from the Maine Job Recovery money. That position was actually designed to be a hub position. So our adult education program in Auburn is part of a larger collaborative that's all of the programs within Androscoggin and Oxford County. And so that position is doing workforce development in Auburn, but pulling and attracting people from all over the region and serving employers from around the region. We have several part-time employees. Those are the folks that work for us in the evening primarily. Those are the people who do our diploma classes, our high-set preparation, and then our community education courses. And we had two kind of brand new classes this year that I wanted to feature as highlights. One is an English language support program that we're actually doing on site at Panelam. So they're a local manufacturing company, and they have hired a significant number of new Mainers to work there who some needs some support with English language acquisition. So we have a teacher who goes there 2 days a week to do instruction on site. That's really tailored. It's customized and contextualized to what those students are doing on the job. And that just started this winter. And the other is that we've started to do some serve-safe kitchen manager training and hospitality training as part of the workforce offerings. So we've always done things like certified nursing assistant, but now we're trying to broaden some of the workforce offerings that we have, including that we're looking to develop an EMT path. So you're going to hear like some of LRTC coming out here because we're leveraging some of those resources. So there's an EMT pathway that's in development right now, as well as some basic manufacturing courses that we're hoping to launch. And finally, we get to the funding slide. So you can see that the local share has remained the same. So that's consistent. There's no additional ask to the local taxpayers. The state subsidy has gone up, which is great. So that is in part because of some funding legislation that came through the state for this year. So they redid the funding formula, and they have added to the pool of overall subsidy. So we are seeing an increase, and what we hope to do with that increase is actually reinvest it into programming. So it will directly go into instructional services, likely for the multilingual population, because that's the population that has the wait list. And that wait list is primarily at the lowest level literacy. So those are the folks that really have the greatest need when it comes to knowing enough English to be able to integrate into the community. Are there any questions?
Oh, sorry. I do have a question. The CNA program, is it associated with any local hospitals where we can accrue revenue if we kind of share CNAs with them?
So the training we do in Auburn for CNA is tied to two places, Clover and St. Mary's. And what we do with them is the Earn While You Learn program. So they actually have staff that teaches the course, and we help to administer the course. So there is a slight fee that we pay for that because we have to do things like do the testing. There's a couple different forms of assessment that we do. We have to help with monitoring progress and provide support services if students are struggling, like tutoring. But we do that specifically in Auburn because Lewiston has a pretty robust pathway for apprenticeship. And a lot of the programs, the employers are looking to leverage the apprenticeship dollars for that right now. So we're trying not to duplicate the services.
And also, when I looked at the first slide, there were like, for the diploma, 90 enrollment, and the class sizes are 1 to 9, but you only have one teacher. Do you just have one teacher for all of these programs?
No, no. So there's one teacher per subject usually. So we would have like one English teacher, one social studies teacher, because they have to be certified teachers. So we don't have one teacher that really,
So they're not included in this full-time Auburn staff, one shared staff?
they're not full-time staff.
Is that the 25 part-time
Yep.
employees? Okay, because I thought that meant the other adult programs that you
It
have in
includes
that-
pretty much everybody except the people who work full-time in adult ed. So we have the one teacher that's full-time, we have a secretary who's full-time, and then we have the Strengthening Maine Workforce Coordinator who's full-time but grant-funded, and then the other one is Carmen, who's our new advisor. Yeah, no problem.
Jen, are you able to make use of anything in the CTE programs at all?
Yes, actually, we have a pretty strong relationship with LRTC in terms of workforce pathways. So one of the things that we've done historically in Lewiston when we had the CTE, because we've had the CTE site over there, is we look at what the offerings are and we try to provide workforce programming for adults in those same sectors in the evenings. So that's why we're looking at we started with culinary, we're building to EMT, and hoping to do some manufacturing. I know the composite program is still being developed for LRTC, so there's some questions around that, but we do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anybody else? Jen, thank you very much. We appreciate your
You're
presentation.
welcome. Thank you.
So the next item for us, this concludes our presentations. I do want to go over briefly the handout that Mark gave tonight. And Mark, since you were the author of this document, what we've done, and I'm ask Mark to speak to this in just a minute, is summarize for the committee the positions that we have eliminated from the operating budget. This is one of those at-a-glance positions. Positions eliminated from ESSER, positions transferred from ESSER to the operating budget, and then new positions. So Mark, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, the only thing I would add to that is if you look at the totals, we're eliminating 14 positions that currently reside in the district, either in the operating budget or ESSER, and we're maintaining 6 positions, and we're really only adding one entirely new position, the BCBA. So you've really got if you will, a net loss of 13 positions in the budget.
Thank you. Questions for Mark regarding the summary sheet, or for me? Yeah?
So does that include the vacancies that are listed in the budget?
So if we had an authorized position and it was vacant, we still retained it in the budget. Now, some of these positions that are being reduced are vacant positions. Some are not, although we have enough vacant positions that anyone who may be losing their current position, there is a position for them in the school system. So we're not looking at laying anybody off, but it may be that they no longer have a position in their current school and they need to go over to another school. Would that be a fair statement, Dr. Brown?
Yes, it is. So we believe from the beginning I stated this, that we can accommodate everybody who's on staff and certified for a position within the Auburn School Department who will be offered that next year, 2025.
And so if someone looks at the budget and sees like 30 vacancies, those vacancies are required. We just can't find someone to work for.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to page 2. This is the fund balance carry analysis. I cannot talk tonight. Fund balance carryover analysis and recommendations. So Mark, I would ask that you walk us through, beginning with the yellow line and ending up with the 5.5 at the bottom.
Sure. So the last audited year we have is fiscal year 22, and at the end of fiscal year 22, we had an unassigned fund balance, meaning it was free to spend in whatever approved ways there are, of almost $7 million. The school committee did commit $250,000 of that to year 2, collectively to year 2 reserve funds for technology and Edward Little Capital Reserve. Earlier in the year, I noted I think that at the last meeting, the school committee also spent excess fund balance funds for a number of purposes, so those are excluded from the total. So at the end of FY '23, the unaudited fund balance was, well, at the end of '22 was 5.4 million. And then you have an unaudited surplus projected for next year, but you've also taken some of that for a second year of funding your reserve accounts. So that brings you down to a fund balance at the beginning of this year, we'll say, of 7.5 million, but you've also committed 2 million of that towards revenue in the current budget. So that gives you a net available at the end of this year of 5.5 million. Now, that doesn't make any assumption about any year-end surplus, but that's what you have available. You want me to keep going, or?
So it is important because, yes, I do want you to keep going, but I would like to remind the committee that tapping into fund balance is sort of like taking money out of your savings account. And if you don't have it to put back at the end of the fiscal year, then you're essentially digging a hole for yourself. So we are judicious when it comes to use of fund balance because Mark and I, while we're retiring, we're very cognizant that the next superintendent and business manager does not want to inherit a scenario where you've already dug a hole for them. So Mark, if you would continue, please.
So what we proposed is a modest increase in the use of the fund balance because it is significant. So going from 2 million this year to 2,350,000 next year. But to do that, you will then, over the next 3 years, have to reduce your use of fund balance by $650,000. Now, it's important to note that that doesn't make any assumption about year-end surpluses. So if you have a year-end surplus, that adds money back into the fund balance. I would also note, as I did last time, that in fiscal year '26, you're not going to have the approximately 200,000 available you've had this year and next year from your fundraising efforts. So there's another loss of revenue. So we would want to be cautious about going any further in the extent to which you're using the fund balance, because it's, well, if you have the 200, if you decide you want to put another $250,000 in between the two reserve accounts, that's actually increasing the use of fund balance to the 2,600,000, which is a significant portion of the 5.5 million. So this is just one potential scenario, but it's to make the point that absent large surpluses in future years, you're going to have to start working that fund balance back down.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Pam?
So we have to spend the fund balance. We have to spend 9% of our estimated budget, and this is what that is.
Well, I didn't calculate the 9% because what you're essentially, you have first of all, you have it's a rolling number. You have 3 years to spend it down. And so what we're looking at is essentially spending the fund balance down to zero over as the scenario being presented here.
And as a reminder that the COVID restriction, which was 9%, is dropping back to 5%.
Right.
So just to be mindful of that. Any more questions about fund balance? Okay, rolling ahead, page 3.
The next 4 pages are just printed copies of what's on our website, which is the questions and answers that have been asked over the last sessions. But we want to make sure you had them in your hands, and you knew that, in fact, we were answering them and putting them out there for everybody to see.
Thank you. It's, again, a way for us to keep the public engaged and to be transparent. And if someone did have a question, then they could look it up and get the answer for that. So at this point in the evening, as we talked about the last time, and I hope to set the table, and I think Chairperson sent you home with some homework, was to come back and be ready to discuss what figure you would like to take to public hearing. You've heard a recommended number from me. The process typically includes a public hearing, which is scheduled for April 3rd to hear from your constituents. April 1st, we'll meet with the City Council to hear what they'd like to tell you. But we would like to hear from you what figure you would be most comfortable with moving forward. Being just one other thing, being mindful that you actually vote on the budget the first Wednesday in May.
Does anyone want to start? Go ahead.
First of all, I would love to say that Looking at the website, I went on the website and the budget and everything that's written, and kudos to you. It's very transparent, it's very easy to read. I've been doing this budget for 6 years, and it's just gotten easier and easier and easier. And I don't know of anyone, well, I'm sure there are people, but I am not one of those people that have a $62 million budget, home budget. So it's nice to have it easily written, and I think it's great that everything is there for the public to see if they have any questions. So kudos to you for doing that. My question, when I was looking at the budget, I kind of was looking for any anomalies, and I did find one, and I just have a question on it. And it's under Cost Center 2, staff. And maybe you could answer the main MEPERS. I'm not sure what that means, and I was just questioning that. I know the other one's Social Security.
It
Is that the retirement?
So it's Maine PERS, it's a Maine Public Employee Retirement System,
Okay.
and it has a percentage that we are required to pay.
So the anomaly is most of them are about $5,000-$6,000, but this one's $56,000, and I was just curious about that.
Can you give me the page number for Cost Center 2?
Cost Center 2, hold on.
Several thousand lines in our budget, so.
Under staff, it's the Cost Center 2, and then after that, it's under staff.
Which page?
You're looking at the line item page? Yeah. And so there's professional teachers with one line, and then professional teachers as a second category.
I'm looking,
You're under special education.
okay, so
staff.
special education, that's Article 2, staffing, and everything, and from all the other staffing too, it's.
Are you talking about the slides from the presentation, or?
No, she's in Article 2, page
Yeah.
1, right?
Page?
Page 1 of 12.
Yeah?
Okay.
Same page 1, though.
Well, I have page 1 of 22,
Yeah, I
so
have
that's
page
the
1 of
problem.
22. You're under,
I'm under staff.
no, so she's under the staff tab, not Cost Center 2. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, sorry, we were all looking in Cost
Okay.
Center 2. Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
okay.
Which line is it?
So if you look down the main PERS retirement fund, everything is probably like about 2,000 to 5,000, but there's one that's 56,000, and that's.
That is an anomaly, I'll have to look at that. Thank you.
Okay.
That may be an error.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, gotcha, yep, okay.
And I didn't know what that meant, main PERS, so that's why I just saw the anomaly and I was questioning it. Also, so being on the finance committee, not that that's my first choice to do, but I am on it. I've noticed that we are, there's a lot of costs for failing systems in our school system. Should we be looking into creating a fund similar to EL regarding these issues as a proactive response rather than a reactive response when we have no other choice? And I'm questioning that, and I as far as budget. And I know in the finance, we talked about maybe that may not be a good option as far as getting another reserve fund, but is there something that we can do so that when systems do break, we're not at the point where it has to be done now? Because, like, for instance, Fairview, you know, their water heater is flooding. We have to do it now. My question is, could we have fixed it if we had had money in the budget? Could we have fixed it 5 years ago so that we wouldn't be at this point now that we had to do it?
Are you thinking in terms of having program funds set aside for needs that come up through a
Yeah, like-
reserve system?
Do we have, could we do that, or is that something that?
Are you thinking
There-
of, I'm sorry, like a contingency account?
Well, there are a couple of ways to think about it. First of all, there are, within the statute, certain limitations to what you can set aside in reserve funds. I think if you wanted to look at that issue, I think the place to begin would be, what would your programming look like to assist those students who need that assistance? and have it as a program discussion before it becomes a budget discussion. Contingency can always be a difficult issue because as you're trying to set a tax rate and then you're setting aside funds with no designation, that can become a difficult conversation, with folks. Why are you setting aside funds without a designation? If the concern is, do we have the flexibility and programming available to assist students at risk who may need tailored services, I would start from a program conversation on that.
Pam, I would add to that, because I think your question is a different one. What hasn't been available up until now is a comprehensive evaluation of your facilities. And for whatever reason, it hasn't been done. But now you have that. And you have the near-term priorities, you have the way-out priorities, and you have the costing of those things. And so as the new folks come on board, I think that the question is, how do we anticipate, what do we plan for, what are policy questions versus what are immediate needs things? We didn't know, I can speak only for me, I don't think Mark did, that the boiler room at Fairview was in the shape that it is until the facilities report was returned. And then we had to do something. So
I misunderstood what you said, yes. I think as you delve into the report, there's about 2.6 million of immediate needs. And I think that would be, and you can have the discussion with Harriman when they come to the table, but that would be your first focus of why are they immediate needs and what do we have to plan to get those accomplished? And that will give you a little bit of breathing room.
I'm sorry to interrupt Mr. Conrad again, but one of the things that I heard attending the facilities committee was that some decisions need to be made by November. And so I would recommend backing up the schedule with November as being the hard stop and saying, okay, we've got 5 or 6 months to start planning and we need to make some decisions about what we want to move forward. And then costing that and saying, okay, is this a capital improvement? Is this a bond? As a matter of policy, where do we want to go with maintaining 9 separate facilities? And you have that roadmap now.
Do you have other questions? Okay. Does anyone else have other questions, comments? Dan?
Yeah, I was just curious on the software for the administration. Shouldn't that come out of the CIP account instead of the operating account?
Mark, do you want to speak to that? Thank you.
So about 45,000 or 40 to 45,000 of that will become a reoccurring cost. I would have to raise the question with our auditors around whether that could be viewed as a capital expense because it's software. It could be. If you'd like me to ask that question, I will.
I figured the initial cost would come out of the CIP, then the yearly cost would come out of your operating budget.
Okay, I can ask that question.
So Mark, a related question to that, do we have the capacity in the CIP bond to include that?
You would have to, it's based on $1 million bond. And you're close to the million, you'll be a little bit below that. What I would do is, if you wanted to move it in there, say you move 200, well, it's what, 180,000 something. So say you were to move that in there, I would just increase your assumption for next year by 20%. Now, they wouldn't issue the bond to the fall, so when I asked for a debt service schedule, excuse me, the first interest payment wouldn't occur to next spring, and it was less than $17,000, so it would be a minimal impact on next year's budget, but you'd be pushing those costs into future budgets. And so that becomes the discussion, is whether you'd rather ante up that now or increase your liability moving down the road with a larger bond, particularly when you're facing those other costs. The other thing I'm thinking about too is if you can absorb it in 1 year, a large proportion of that cost, over $100,000, drops out, and that might really help you in another year when you're faced with increasing debt service and the loss of that $200,000 in the fundraising fund. So it is something of a strategic question for how you want to position yourself beyond this next year.
The other thing that I would add to that, Dan, is that by moving those costs into the CIP program, you have essentially reduced your $1 million bonding ability for what might be identified by the Facilities Committee as an immediate need.
Is that something they're installing soon, the software, or is that in the future?
So that's underway.
Well, and this is why I want to ask the auditor. So the way Tyler Technologies charges that out, you have the support costs we've talked about, but a lot of that is based on fees for providing services, either in terms of transition of data from our current software to the new software, or consultation for developing new chart of accounts, or especially around training and the hours it takes to bring in their individuals to train our staff and work with them in that transition of data. So it's not like you're just buying a license for that much money on a one-time basis. It's really based on services that are going to be provided in the process, if that makes sense.
Following up on that, Mark, is there a minimum amount that you would not go below to add something to the CIP? Like, so that we're not being frivolous about what we put in that account? Like, we wouldn't,
From an audit standard, I think the threshold for capital equipment is $10,000.
10,000?
In recording it as capital equipment, for example. So in the past, we've bought things like heavy-duty lawnmowers and trucks, things like that. I think one of the challenges for Auburn, I think it's true of the city as well as it is the school department, in most places I've worked, you have some allowance in your budget every year for capital items that aren't necessarily the $700,000 boiler room, right? So if you need a $50,000 truck for maintenance, or the $30,000 mower, or you need the rooftop unit for Walton, and you're budgeting it proactively at $50,000, you put it into your operating budget so you're not constantly bonding it because of the cost that comes with the interest and issuing costs of a bond. And I think Dr. Brown has referred to that too, that we're trying to move away from putting those smaller items into the bonds and really seeing if we can fund those through the operating budget so we're not driving up our interest costs over time. And you're not going to have a lot of room for those items down the road as you look at some of your bigger items too.
Mm-hmm. So that partially answers what Pam was referring to, I think, earlier, about having money available on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for a capital improvements bond, you can't simply go out and bond without knowing what you're bonding for. Now, you do have, and we talked a little bit in the Finance Committee about this, you've had some projects that have either come in below budget or were canceled for different reasons. They've been out there for a while. And so you do have about $300,000 collectively between your FY21 and 22 bonds that are unexpended with projects that can either be canceled or came in under budget. So you have a little leeway on your bonds. That's how we funded the Walton rooftop unit. So that's going to give you a little bit of flexibility next year if a surprise happens or you need money next year to get a project off the ground to be completed in the following summer, like you need to pay for engineering next year for a fiscal year 26, summer of 25 project. So you do have some flexibility right now you can take advantage of if you need it.
Are the, was it 545,000 for the boiler at Fairview? Is that in the CIP? Did I see that in the
So
CIP?
the 545,000 is for the Sherwood Heights kitchen renovation that we'll be asking you to approve later tonight. And that's coming from excess fund balance funds in the food service program, the nutrition program. And we've been asked to spend those excess funds by the Department of Education. The boiler room is, I think, 700,000, although I should have more accurate pricing within a week to two. And it may come in a little bit less than that, but that 700,000 is for the boiler room at Fairview.
It's the CIP.
And that's in the CIP, along with the The three items in the CIP are the Fairview Boiler Room, the new fire alarm panel at Park Ave for $32,000, and then the software transition for your HVAC systems.
All right, you might have to bear with me when I ask this question. This has to do with the revenue that comes from the city of Auburn. Last year, we had $19,797,000. This year, we're looking for $20,866,000, which to me is about $1 million difference. So if we go into the city and they say you need to cut X percent, is it off of that million or is it off the 62 million? What is it when you talk about the percentage? I'm looking down the road in case we have to cut something.
So I'm going to start with that, and then Mark can answer. So percentage cut for us, every percent is about $200,000. So we're at 5.25, 5.5. If the city came back and said 3, we'd be looking for $400,000 that would have to get cut.
I'm
Mark, do you
hoping
wanna
that doesn't
add
happen.
to that?
Dr. Brown had asked me that question a while back, so she's thinking along the same lines. So, yes, the city council will focus on the tax rate, I'm sure. And so if they say, well, we want you to drop it 1%, that means you're going to have to drop your costs by just under $200,000 for each percent.
And just to add to that, one of the factors that's still outstanding pertains to health insurance. Mark and I guessed 12%. Every percent decrease or increase is $66,000. So we're hopeful we were spot on. Maybe we guessed too high and it's 1% or 2%, but that'll give you some play there. But as I've said before, it's always easier to take money out than it is to put money in, and that's a line that has to get funded. So if that comes in higher than 12%, we'll be back here talking with you again about where to find those dollars.
Anyone else have any other questions or comments?
Can
I am going to share, so Councilman Platts could not be here tonight, but he did share some feedback on the budget that he authorized me to share with you. He didn't have any specific line item suggestions for the budget, as he feels those are best handled by the principals and directors of certain departments. Overall, he'd love to see the school budget come in somewhere between a 3.5% to 4% increase, as opposed to the proposed 5.4 or 5.6% increase. The suggestion he had was to take a look at line items that were underspent this past year and not fund those at the same levels in the coming year. So that was kind of his general overview. Said he would not support cuts to special education or sports extracurriculars, et cetera. In terms of my thoughts, as I've said previously, I very much appreciate your thorough and very transparent process that you and your staff present. It's very helpful, makes it very easy to understand why the budget is what it is. I also very much appreciate the budget message that lays out all the major drivers of the budget, as it's very useful and clear. I've reviewed the budget multiple times. I really cannot identify areas where I feel we should or can reduce it at this point. In fact, if anything, I identified a couple places where I ideally would like to see an additional classroom teacher for a couple of our larger classroom sizes. I think it was like East Auburn and Park. But I also trust the judgment of our admin team that if you feel that we can still provide the quality education with our currently budgeted staff, then I'm okay with that. You guys already covered the ESSER funds. I think you did a good job of moving some of those ESSER-funded positions into the operating budget where it was appropriate, without having a detrimental effect on how we deliver education. And I think, as you've alluded to many times, the majority of our budget is people, 80%, and we're aware that, cost has increased in recent years, and the school department is not immune to that. We're a large school district, which means, we're a large employer in the community, and with that comes the cost of employing our staff while also continuing to provide competitive salaries, wages, benefits, so on and so forth. So I mean, as you presented in the first budget presentation, the real drivers of the increase associated with health insurance for staff, which you listed at just under $1 million, the increase to the cost of special education, just over $1 million, and the loss of $1 million in ESSER funds, which are all costs that are kind of beyond our control, I think, at the city and school department level. So I'm currently in support of the budget as it's been presented, and I don't have any suggested changes at this time. So at this point, do we need to do a straw poll on moving forward with this budget to the city council presentation? Yes. Okay. So all of those in favor in moving this budget forward to the city council presentation? Okay. All those opposed? All right. Straw poll passes. Yes.
It may be anticlimactic, but going back to Ms. Hart's question, I've gone through the main PERS accounts in the budget. It seems to be a typo on the staffing page as opposed to an error in the budget.
The budget is what it is, it's just a typo.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's nice to know that you're reading those thousands of lines so closely. More eyes on, you know what? I tell my staff, the more eyes on a budget, the better. We'd rather find those mistakes now than later on.
Okay, so I think, are we ready to move on? So I think we'll move on to school committee student representatives report.
Thank you. Last Friday, LRTC took 96 students up to Skills USA in Bangor. And, well, it was actually Thursday. We competed on Friday. And in total, we took home around 45 medals. And of those medals, it was 16 of them were gold medals. And I believe upon the 16, 12 of them will be advancing to nationals in Atlanta to compete in specific trade skills.
I would like to say Connor won gold for his wedding cake competition. Doesn't give himself credit, so.
Excellent, thank you. Superintendent's report.
Thank you very much. So I would like to get on the radar of the school committee the possibility, not for 23-24, but for 24-25, of an early release for inclement weather. So over time, Auburn and Lewiston were the two holdouts for dismissing midday for inclement weather. And Lewiston recently made a policy change, and I think that we as a system and the new superintendent need to think about that. It technically is in the policy if you look at what the superintendent is able to do regarding school closure, but I think it would be for your credibility and transparency's sake a good discussion to have. So going forward, not for 23-24 because I don't think parents have had enough notice, but for 24-25, I think that needs to be on the table. And just for the record, I did release schools in December when we lost power and we had that terrible December storm. So it has been done, but I think that I would like the committee to begin thinking more seriously that will become an option for the superintendent to make. Thanks, that's it for me.
So you mean like changing the policy and looking into the policy of that so that
No, the policy does give the superintendent the ability to change the school day, but I think that the committee needs to discuss how they feel about that as a more regular, as opposed to an emergency basis. And then that if in fact the committee agrees with that, then somehow announce that to families, that it could be Thursday morning at 9 o'clock and you will have an early dismissal because the weather is such that it's not really safe to run the buses at 4 o'clock that afternoon.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's something to put on a future policy subcommittee meeting.
Policy, yes, and then for the full committee to be aware of that.
Okay, thank you. I do not have a chairperson's report tonight, and we do not have a city council update tonight. Committee reports, any specific committee reports anyone wants to highlight?
As far as this finance subcommittee, the agenda and the minutes are on our website. If anybody has any questions as to the new business that we're going to be putting motions forward for, as far as the Fairview boiler, and the Sherwood Heights Kitchen. These are things that need to be done. They are a needed necessity, and that is why, as if you read the minutes, you'll see that is why we chose to, as the subcommittee, we chose to go forward with that.
Thank you. Corin?
The curriculum minutes I kind of went over before, but I just kind of wanted to revamp, circle back. And because we went up, we spoke about the, I apologize, the new grant that we received for about $215,000 and what that would be used for, going to the science of reading. And we're also going to be looking further into the science leadership team and bringing a proposal will likely be brought to the curriculum subcommittee in May or June for our science curriculum.
Great, thank you. And I just would like to note in the minutes of the March 4th meeting of the Health and Safety Committee that there was a discussion regarding the US CDC's change to its guidance regarding isolation and return to school protocols for COVID-positive individuals, which was subsequently shared with school nurses via the Maine Department of Education. That updated guidance now brings the treatment of COVID in line with other respiratory infections and allows students and staff who test positive for COVID to return to school once their symptoms are improving and they've been fever-free without the use of fever-reducing medications for more than 24 hours. So they'll no longer be required to be out for 5 days. And the committee agreed to continue to follow the guidance provided by the Maine DOE, as we always have done per our policy JLCC on communicable diseases. We don't have any old business tonight, so moving on to new business. Do I have a motion to approve the Auburn School Department school calendar for the 2024-2025 school year? Corin?
Second.
Pam? Any questions, discussion? I did have one question for Dr. Brown earlier that I'd probably like to just have you talk about in this forum about the change to the Christmas break, where it's now 2 weeks proposed on our school calendar.
Thank you. So a word, before I answer the chairperson's question about the 2-week break, something that is in statute that we have to abide by is all of the schools that send students to LRTC can only have 5 dissimilar days. So it does limit us a little bit in how we are able to fashion our calendar in terms of when we begin, when we take school breaks, and so on. So I recommended that we have a 2-week break at Christmas because I am concerned about student attendance coming back on a Thursday and Friday. And I think it'll be a hardship for staff. So I have recommended that we have the 2-week break then. I also met with the labor management group back in January, I think it was Dr. Doris, and talked with them about the calendar. Those suggestions have been included. They asked us to not put an in-service day on a Thursday and to move that to the following week, so those things have been made. So we have vetted this with a number of different groups. We do meet and consult as part of that effort. So that is why I recommended the 2-week break for the December holiday.
Thank you. I think that just helps kind of people understand. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions on the school calendar? No? All those in favor? Motion passes. Moving on to a motion, can I entertain a motion to authorize the pre-purchase of Fairview boiler room equipment at an estimated cost of between $150,000 and $200,000?
So moved.
Second.
Pam. Any discussion? So again, as Pam alluded, this was discussed in the Finance Subcommittee and is included in the minutes of the Finance Subcommittee meeting.
So explain where the money comes from.
Mark?
Mark?
And we had a discussion on this at the Finance Committee. So this will be, presumably would be included in your bonding request. If for some reason that bonding request didn't go through, and again, it's going to have minimal impact on next year's budget based on the single interest payment, you do have $300,000 available in your undesignated in your current capital improvement bonds that are sitting out there, which you could reserve against that equipment in essence, and you take possession of it and store it, because you don't do it this year, next year or two, you're not going to be able to heat the school.
So pre-purchase, you're buying something, this year's money that you need to fix it summer, is that what?
Yes, I would look at it this way. Your capital improvement bonds that you've already have established will provide temporary financing for these items, and then when you bond it, you can reimburse those funds back. Typically, for like the Edward Little High School project, you went out and got a note so you could fund the construction prior to the bond proceeds coming due. You'd be doing the same thing here using your capital improvement accounts.
And also, the people that are going to be doing the work in order to put the boiler in there, they can only do it at a certain time, but they're going to need that equipment, so that's why we're purchasing it as well, right?
This gets to the issue of surprises, because typically you want to look at 2 years for these projects. The first year you fund the engineering, and the second year you fund the work, because it has to be done in the summer typically. This reflects your supply chain issues today, where you can no longer just say, okay, we'll order it in July and have it 2 weeks later. And the fact it has to be done this coming summer. As I said in the Finance Committee, I didn't like bringing this forward, but we really don't have a chance from what the engineers are saying.
All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor? Motion passes. All right, entertain a motion to authorize the renovation of the Sherwood Heights kitchen at an estimated cost of $545,000. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Pam, do I have a second? Corin? Discussion on this one. Again, also discussed in the Finance Subcommittee and referred to in our minutes.
And we just went over this as well, but can you say where this money's coming from?
Yes, so the food service program has been very successful in recent years. Their fund balance has been accruing beyond what the limitations are. There's a limit to what you should maintain for a fund balance in the food service program. And so the state has asked us to spend at least $477,000. And so this will be funded through the excess fund balance funds in the food service or nutrition program. And that
Mark,
funding is currently available.
If I might, that is a separate fund balance from the district's fund balance.
Yes, so the nutrition program has a dedicated fund balance, a dedicated stream of revenues and expenditures. So, which is why you can't just transfer those funds or use them for something other than a legitimate purpose for the nutrition program. We also know that that fund balance is continuing to grow, so you'll probably see more requests coming forward to upgrade other kitchens over time.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's no other discussion, all those in favor? Motion passes. All right. So we have a list of our upcoming meetings. And do I have any future agenda items or requests for information? Okay. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Pat, and all those in favor? We are adjourned at 6:58.